Welcome everyone. Back live. Day 10, unbelievably. Day 10 of the war in Ukraine. Which is pretty crazy. So we started streaming last Thursday. And I think we did a long stream Friday night, a long stream Saturday night, and I think perhaps Saturday night is when in some ways the conflict felt most tense, or at least to me. I think that was the night we were tracking what was going on in Kyiv. Hopefully you can hear me, by the way. I can turn that down if we need to. And I feel like what's going on in Ukraine, the invasion, has probably become more of the status quo. Welcome everyone. Explod, Ian, Martin, Sancho, Ari, Durgarat, Will, Axe, Ethan, Katie, Yoni, Vlatka, Crouch, Chris, Kevbot, Yolanda, Ed. Yeah, thanks Ed. Noah, Lee, Stevie, CJ, Samich, Kosha, Chris, and Rembo. Welcome along everyone. Welcome Matt Sprong. Welcome Kim. What's happening in Ukraine almost feels like inevitably becomes more of the status quo, and therefore in some ways perhaps less kind of immediately shocking. Not saying that's a good or bad thing, I just feel like that's probably just will happen. And there seems to be more space and time to discuss what this means for the wider world, and particularly what Putin's next move will be if he's either successful or not successful in Ukraine. Welcome Jumping Jack, welcome Hello Pilot. Volume up. Do you want my volume up? Hopefully it's okay. Welcome Techno, welcome Susie, welcome Soren. I need to catch up on what's happened the last few hours because I've been streaming Gran Turismo 7. But again, seems like Putin is increasingly isolated. There was a statement from the US Secretary of State saying that he really believes that Ukraine will actually win this war, which is probably not a view that was shared by many beforehand. To what extent that's just he actually believes or has the intelligence for that, I don't know. But yeah, definitely more questions about what NATO should or should not do. So let me just bring up my usual sources. Sorry. I think one of the biggest pieces of news from today was about these humanitarian corridors. I had speculated that one might be in Kharkiv, but I don't actually think one was agreed for Kharkiv. So these corridors were agreed, but then it sounds like the Russians shelled after the ceasefire, and then civilians that had been told to leave through these corridors actually had to come back. I don't know the status of that United Nations resolution, Security Council resolution, or what was proposed as a resolution after the shelling at the nuclear power plant here. Yeah, there's also the video from the Sky News. So that came out yesterday when we were streaming. I've seen it. It's pretty insane, actually. So if anyone hasn't seen the Sky News footage, it's pretty insane, actually. Welcome everyone. There's a lot of names here I recognise from last week, which is crazy. Yeah, the other thing today, a lot of images and videos released, it seems specifically today, about Russian aircraft going down. So it's a pretty shocking video, and I won't put it here because obviously the pilot and the crew would have died from that. But a pretty shocking video of a Russian, I think it was a transport helicopter, getting shot down by a portable anti-air missile. And I think what's unusual is that it was a head-on. The missile was fired head-on and must have exploded something in the helicopter. Mark Williams says today in Asda, no biscuits, no juice. I'm not sure whether that's related, I don't know. John says, I think I've read they've captured 6 pilots today. So in the West, at least, it seems that Russia is really losing a information war. Let me get up maybe some latest maps. Bear with me. Okay, they haven't updated those. Yeah, so it feels like there was general kind of press activity today about air superiority, which is something we've always talked about, and Ukraine saying that they have bombers able to, go on sorties and bomb strategic Russian targets. And we've also seen these kind of man-pads, man-powered anti-air rockets able to shoot down Russian planes and helicopters. So definitely a statement being made on air superiority. Obviously, there was a statement from Zelensky where he was very angry at NATO for not enforcing a no-fly zone. Essentially said that NATO, any deaths from now on, essentially the blood will be on NATO's hands. But we've spoken a lot about no-fly zones in these streams, and how, my opinion, and maybe completely wrong, I'm not an expert, but my opinion was, and is, that if there was a window to enforce one, it would have been before the invasion. So at Ukraine's request, NATO could have enforced a no-fly zone. I think now it's just too risky. If a NATO plane gets shot down, the risk of escalation is just too high, and it goes back to the thing about tolerance, and does NATO actually tolerate what's happening? Jedi sounds like Zelensky will NATO. I think it was going to be a difficult ask to get NATO to enforce the no-fly zone. Yeah, welcome back, everyone. Hello, pilot. My prediction is that Russia will not be successful with controlling Ukraine, even if they achieve a military victory. Ukraine's just too strong. We will see. It kind of depends. I think Kherson is going to be a really interesting example, because I understand the mayor there has kind of agreed with the Russian troops that he's going to try and oversee no civilian resistance ultimately. Thanks, Miss Samic. Jumping Jack, guess the best what Ukraine may achieve is a temporary stalemate. Again, I don't know. If we go back a week, when I was streaming and we were all here Saturday night UK time, going into Sunday morning, I feel like that is when things, in terms of for Ukraine, felt at their lowest. I don't know if anyone agrees or if that's just my perspective, but it felt like there were Russian troops in the centre of Kyiv. It kind of had seemed like this armour column had gone past the strategic airport here and was going to encircle Kyiv. Heavy shelling of lots of other Ukrainian cities. Whereas now it almost feels as though there's question marks about whether Ukrainians are going to push Russia back in places. And I don't know how accurate that is. Martin, for NATO to impart a no-fly zone, there is the same act as engaging in the war. But then again, how to deliver weapons not taking sides. It's definitely a blurred line, right? What if... Let me put a hypothetical out there, because it is a Saturday night. What if NATO had completely autonomous drones to enforce a no-fly zone, and basically just could hand them over at the border and they would be operated by Ukraine, these drones would never leave Ukrainian airspace or territory, and they would only shoot down military aircraft. It's very hypothetical. But would that be NATO getting involved in the war? To the extent where... I mean, what NATO's... Let's be clear, like, NATO is made up of member states. NATO as an organisation is ultimately... Quite strong words, but is afraid of soldiers from any of its member nations being attacked or killed by Russia. Because then that member nation may invoke Article 5, and then NATO has a real headache, to put it really simply. Martin, it's a blurred line which Putin is always testing as a kind of declaration of war. What does Putin want to do about that then? I saw that he's made a statement where he said, I think he was meeting like Aeroflot flight stewards or something, and he said like the sanctions are like a act of war. I don't think we've really... Again, if anyone knows, has a war been declared? Has Ukraine... Is there some paperwork that has been signed where Ukraine says, yeah, we are now at war with Russia? I know Turkey recognised some sort of war to close the Bosphorus to Russian warships that don't have a home port in the Black Sea. Brad, Putin's only leverages nukes at this point. I have to say the chat is extremely respectful tonight. I don't want to connect that with YouTube being banned in Russia, but I don't know anything about marine traffic. If you mean Black Sea traffic, then let me know if you've got anything. Maybe I haven't seen the video, Daniel, I just read it. Random Russia says not war. Yeah, Russia says it's a limited military excursion or whatever. Tarek says Zelensky needs more help from NATO and Europe. What do you propose? What would you like to see done? Tadok? So I think that might be Greek. Axe, there have been some documents retrieved by some downed Russian soldiers that basically have orders of war. Russia refused to acknowledge it as war, though. I feel like, again, we touch on these things in these streams, but the more authoritarian a political system becomes and centralises power in one person, the more perhaps you can believe your own propaganda. I don't know. I really do think on a global level this is sort of like a little bit, it is a little fight. In a way, it is a fight for democracy, and I guess liberal democracy, and the right for people to choose who they want to be governed by. The Deck Poker Club, the EU, UN, NATO are getting close to the point where they will have to be involved. Standing by and watching is becoming more and more untenable. The question is, if Russia becomes weaker, or Russia appears to be much weaker conventionally, now, and what is NATO's end goal? Because if NATO didn't dissolve after the fall of the Soviet Union, then what is NATO's end goal? Is it to perpetually have peace by being such a strong deterrent? Let us know again, by the way, if you've got any interesting flights you'd like us to track. Duke 43, still up in the air. Brad, I wish we had reliable info on the mindset of the Russian people, conflicting reports, and polls suggest they still support Putin. Again, when I say authoritarian and isolated, I'm not saying he doesn't have the support. I think the sanctions will galvanise, in a very general sense, Russian people against the West who are imposing the sanctions. Will Bates, to what extent do you think Russia feels threatened? If you mean in the general sense, I can see how in the context of Russia you would see the expansion of NATO eastwards and this kind of or open question on Ukraine joining NATO as a threat. If you would see that NATO's border would be here, very close to Moscow, and then NATO would be able to amass troops here, amass armor columns or whatever. So I can see how that would be perceived as a security 100%. In the same way that if, for whatever reason, You know, it's obviously not happened, but for whatever reason, you know, Russia was able to amass troops here that close to Berlin, it would be opposed to it would be amount to a security threat. RCH 341 from the US. Let me plug that in. Again, what China do, what India do is very important. Oh wow, yeah, that has been on a long flight, hasn't it? C-17, presumably going to land here, I think. But we'll track it and see. Well, Bates, would NATO invade a country though? Which country? Random USA can fly U-2 spy planes over Ukraine. I don't think U-2 spy planes are really necessary when you have satellites, but I may be wrong. Sorry. Flat out, is the AN-225 really gone? Yeah, we pulled up pictures yesterday. We speculated on the first day of the invasion that it may have been at this airbase. And it has gone. So I can just want to put up. It was in this hangar. The hangar's been destroyed with the plane in it. Sorry. Yeah, we've seen throughout the streams that this airport here seems to be where a lot of Western cargo planes seem to be going into. We'll see if we can see some IL-76s going around today as well on the Russian side. Rebel Line, the younger online generation certainly appear to see themselves as globally peaceful types. I think there is again a huge question about whether there is this gravitational force amongst humanity to war and conflict. You know, that force centered around the scarcity of resources will always lead to conflict. And the counterpoint to that is, as we become more advanced and kind of educated and we learn from history, as civilization kind of builds on itself, the counterpoint is maybe we build these systems that work against these kind of base human desires or faults or whatever. And this feels like a, you know, broadly the West lives in peace, and it's kind of, what system would you rather live under? Now you could say that the international framework essentially supports the West, and although you don't have colonialism now, you might have neo-colonialism if you subscribe to that view. But even if you subscribe to that view, I say logically you would see the world in a better place now as it was 150 years ago. And the political system in Russia is, in the last 15 years, has never seemed particularly comfortable with this rules-based order, and now it seems to be firmly rejecting it. And it's almost like a fight for what kind of international framework do we want to live in. Dan Paul, what's the deal with India anyway? I've seen some comments from Indian people supporting Russia, given India's past with UK rule. Why would some be supporting Russia? India's past with UK rule means that there's a lot of resentment in India against being colonised and run by the East India Company. But putting that all aside, there's also a lot of people that think the British rule in India was a good thing. And putting it all aside, fundamentally, throughout the Cold War, the USA, well, after 1947, the USA aligned itself more with Pakistan, and Russia aligned itself more with India, supplying weapons, etc. Those have been the existing kind of, not alliances, but spheres of influence. That may be changing now. I don't know. There's a lot of whataboutism in kind of the Indian commentary approach to this. Video 24 maker, how could any reasonable leader even assume that major powers would ever go to war again, knowing it would mark the end of humanity's know it? So something that I think is becoming more apparent from this conflict is if you want to ensure your security, then you should have nuclear weapons as a state. If Ukraine had nuclear weapons, unlikely it would be getting invaded by Russia, you could say. Maybe Russia would be using different means to achieve its goals. So what's happened now is a push towards more states having nuclear weapons. So you can see why Iran wants to have nuclear weapons. Because Iran with nuclear weapons is very different to Iran without nuclear weapons. And the more nuclear weapons there are out there in the world in different states, the more people that, inverted commas, have fingers on that nuclear button, the more room for miscalculation there is. So even if you believe that mutually assured destruction stands up, the risk of miscalculation grows. So again, I don't know how this plays out, but you can see that, you know, even Japan has said they want to be part of a military alliance where they can host nuclear weapons, which is, you know, extraordinary really when you consider they're the only country on earth to have been bombed by nuclear weapons. Gary, the UK has been at war for the best part of 50 years to the Irish issues, Gulf wars, Afghanistan, etc. Our country is not peaceful, but I take the point the Kingdom would. Maybe in this international framework which recognises ultimately above all the sovereignty of nations. So it's not an international government, it's actually the opposite. It recognises the sovereignty of nations, but it also provides a legitimate pathway for that sovereignty to be infringed, i.e. for countries to be invaded, if the United Nations Security Council can pass a binding resolution. And you have the P5 as a counter to that, because all the P5 nations, UK, France, USA, China and Russia, have a veto. And maybe the West was too excursionist. Maybe you have to accept that there are states out there that don't agree with your ideals, but that's not reason enough to invade them. I don't know, it's a big question. But in any event, I think there's a lot of whataboutism you said. Christopus, aren't nuclear weapons more of an attacking weapon? I don't think Russia would care about Ukraine has them, would invade anyway. Nuclear weapons strategically are seen as defensive weapons, but because it's a bit of a confusing one. But essentially, if you have two nations that have nuclear weapons, there is no point, theoretically, the United Nations using nuclear weapons on Russia, because as soon as those nuclear weapons are deployed, Russia will deploy its nuclear weapons, and then everyone dies. Now, because of that theory, no one should launch them. And because of that theory, it should put off conventional warfare between the two countries. And you can see that exactly happening out now. Like, is it fair to say that pretty much the only reason why... Well, no, okay. It's not. Is it fair enough to say that one of the major reasons why NATO is not providing direct military support is because of mutually assured destruction? It's a thing that isn't really talked about, but it is the backbone. In my view, anyway. Again, I may be wrong. The Mandalorian, I'm sure we're at a time where nuke could be hijacked and disarmed mid-flight. I think the thing is about like Star Wars and the Reagan administration, other defensives, like you sort of have the Iron Dome in Israel. Mutually assured destruction only works if you will get destroyed and they will get destroyed. So the more interceptions there are, it actually kind of undermines the theory. Blackbird says, I say that's the case. Jingops, that's the only reason. Jerry, not sure it's the only reason, because, you know, conventional war will still be. But okay, let's put it out there. Let's say nuclear weapons don't exist. So nuclear weapons don't exist. At this stage, do you think NATO would either directly support Ukraine military or go further. It's hard to think how the world would be like if there wasn't mutually assured destruction, because surely the Cold War would have got hot. So it's not an official poll. I went through an official poll. Okay, see. Anomalous shepherd creations. Do nations still have secret weapons? Well, by the nature of being secret, I wouldn't know. Clan Dad says yes, because NATO is far superior numbers. Dylan says totally yes. So you wonder says go further. Dylan says not at 10 days. No, yeah, we're still early times. Bryce says absolutely. Matt says the West. Yeah, we spoke. Yeah, it's not a. How would you describe it then, Matt? Anton, USA NATO would have gone in now with no nukes. Miss Sandwich says absolutely. Jorky says the same. Ireland says yes. Matt Walker, we would be divided between 3 totalitarian states without nukes. I don't follow that, I'm afraid. Jumping Jack says go further, I'm afraid. Chris says yes. Video 24, USSR would have been destroyed in conventional war. So therefore, we owe it to nuclear. We owe it to nuclear weapons and mutually assured destruction that there was no World War III. So I can't remember who asked the question in terms of nuclear weapons, but are they offensive or defensive? But you can see that the logic seems so warped, but probably is the reason why there hasn't been World War III. And yet, I'm sure it's a flawed logic, because as people have said, there's always a chance of mishap or malfunction or someone going rogue. You know, if someone is, for example, let's just say hypothetically, if someone is particularly suicidal, it doesn't matter as much that the consequences of what they do would destroy the world. And that's my point about when you centralize power in individuals, you become more prone to the values that those individuals have in the context of their individual circumstances. Welcome to Pius. JP says they are obviously offensive right now. Matt Walker, the only international guarantee that works is mutually assured destruction. Can I enlarge the plane map? Yeah, I'm just zooming in and out. This is Flight Radar 24. We have a gold subscription, so we have a different map, I think. But you can get on this website for free, flightradar24.com. And this one is liveuamap.com. You can also get on for free. We'll get ADB up in the background. I actually don't have it in the background at the moment. Jumping Jack, would Putin have started an invasion without nukes? It's almost hard to... That hypothetical I gave is a bit... doesn't really make sense, because if there were no nuclear weapons, then there would have... You'd almost certainly imagine there would have been World War III after World War II. So you want to say Sweden and Finland are peaceful countries don't want war? Christopher Ryan, what happens if a nuclear state like China or North Korea with heavily weaponized censorship and the citizens don't know about MAD? What then? The risk to use nukes drastically decreases. That's a very interesting point. That's a very interesting point, actually. So that's separate from what if your leadership doesn't care that their country's going to get destroyed, which is an obvious flaw in mutual assured destruction. But what if they don't? What you're saying is, what if they see the cost as worth it? Is that what you're saying? And they wouldn't. But it doesn't make sense, because their citizens surely would find out, and it would be total annihilation. There's an interesting point in there, but I can't quite work it out. I'm not smart enough. Tobias, the president wouldn't fire nukes himself, though chances are the operator would refuse. Yeah, there wasn't a situation in Russia, I think in the 80s or maybe even 80s, where we've spoken about it, where there was a new software system and it showed that America had launched a few nuclear weapons. The guy in charge was meant to retaliate and he didn't because he thought it might be a failure, and it was a failure. But you have to remember the people down this chain ultimately are there to do that job when it arises. It's a question that is asked of politicians all the time, which is it's one of these questions to kind of there's no right answer, but they get asked, would you press the red button if you had to? Which is like a horrible question to answer, but I guess it is a valid question. Video, only 2 countries can really take out the entire planet, though, Russia and USA. Doesn't that mean that any other 2 nations could potentially... It's a good point. It's a good point. It's still mutually assured destruction. It's just not world ending, if that makes sense. Yeah, thanks, Zek and Rest. Let us know if you see anything interesting on that. Let me just refresh my sources. MasterCard has also suspended services in Russia just now. So MasterCard is out. Microsoft is out. Coca-Cola is out. Visa is out. All Western news is out. So it's Iron Curtain, really. It's an Iron Curtain in the digital age. And are the Russian people... You know, we've seen for centuries states kind of cut off their citizens from information, etc. Is 2022 the year where it doesn't work? It's a very good point, Matt Walker. So the red button absolutely must be pressed if your country is attacked, so the other country is also removed from history and survivors and human race can prison you. So let's say, and I don't, again, the chances of there being a nuclear war are like incredibly slim, in my view. They're just a little bit higher than they were a week ago. But let's say, for example, that the situation deteriorates such that you have either the United States or Russia deploys its nuclear weapons. So let's say you're Russian, military command, and you see the deployment, submarines, silos, all up in the air, the rockets. If you deploy, you are killing hundreds of millions of people. If you don't deploy, you are getting killed. Your people are getting killed, and the victors of that war will be the ones that shot the weapon first. Now, the only thing I would say is that that would be a situation where provocation has led to military retaliation. So at some level there would have been provocation, and that provocation could be conventional war. But it seems like here what happened in Ukraine is that Russia basically saying they were provoked. The eastward expansion of NATO was a provocation. And they've responded militarily with the invasion. They've given other reasons as well. But so who is more likely to launch nuclear weapons first? Who is more likely to escalate out of provocation into action? I don't know, but it seems like it could be Russia. Thanks, John, for becoming a Courtesy Corporal. Hope you enjoyed the stream, John. Welcome, Patricia. Yippee-ki-yay says threat of nuclear accident may be higher than threat of nuclear warfare. Yeah, I mean, we were not that far away. If you've seen the footage, we were not that far away from... we're not a million miles away from there being a significant nuclear accident in Ukraine a couple of days ago. The second significant nuclear accident in Ukraine. Yeah, Stanislav Petrov. was the officer. Yeah, we don't need to go, because again, I think it's very slim, but just to kind of play it through. Healing, by the way, in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Missiles detonated at high altitude just to posture. Leon, it's one thing to raise your people with censorship, it's another matter to suddenly cut off citizens off who have participated in modern world, in Western world. I think there is perhaps this view in the Russian state that I don't know how to kind of explain this, but there seems to be this view that the West, and including Australia, but the West is inherently biased. The West is in a position of privilege built on colonialism, the privilege of deciding on the international framework after the Second World War, the privilege of essentially being able to invade or overthrow regimes whenever it wants, and therefore the media is implicit in that. That seems to be the view. So if that is the view, then it questions the whole of the West at a very high level. Like, everyone is implicit in it. And obviously in the West we don't have that perspective. You know, the United Nations is there to protect the sovereignty of nations. And, you know, people generally seem very happy to live in the West. And people in the West would say generally seems to have a high degree of free speech. And when you look at Russia, and, you know, if you call what's going on in Ukraine a war, then you may be sentenced to jail for 15 years. Other censorship, etc. To us, that seems like more stereotypical censorship. But I think the Russian view is that a lot of the West is inherently biased. And when you look at Putin's statement that he made on the dawn of the war, it goes into those themes. I can't explain that. I don't know if anyone else in chat can explain it, but that seems to be the view. I play by the West rules, or, you know, you're not part of the club, and ultimately you may be invaded. Martin, I still have a feeling that Russia is getting a feel of the water, waging a war which seems not high level, kind of old fashioned. Intense Ukraine enforcing their own no-fly zone today. That is true. Lots of reports today about videos and photos of Russian Air Force fixed-wing and helicopters being shot down. Don't know if anyone's seen Forte 10 up in the air today. So it's kind of, you know, when we see these laws, like you can't refer to what's going on in Ukraine as a war, you may be jailed in Russia. When we see, you know, in the United Nations Security Council, the representative reject there being any shelling in Kyiv or Kharkiv. In the West, we can't square that with the footage. And to us, that is lying and wrong. But in Russia, I think they question just the entire framework of, well, you just want to keep, you know, exploiting poor nations. So it's almost like it's crosstalk. But I think it's interesting to see that Ukraine has applied to join the EU, Moldova has applied to join the EU, Georgia has applied to join the EU in the last few days. So these countries that could be within Russia's sphere of influence, their representatives are choosing to reject it. Yeah, they talk about cancel culture a lot and talk about fake news. We did a stream, it's only a few days ago, but it feels like weeks ago. But we did a stream when we looked at one of the what they called statements by the Russian delegate in the United Nations Security Council, where he brought up a fake news article, but seemed to weaponize it. So the article was saying, "Hey, this is fake news. Watch out for it." And he was saying, "Look at these images in the West that are fake news." So I can't. I'm not intelligent enough to really elaborate that. Adam, I think World War III is inevitable. NATO will not get into this conflict because NATO is getting ready for World War III. Don't know about that. But I do wonder, and this is another thing, is that since 1945, and this was really evident with the Soviet Union and really evident with East and West Germany, the Western liberal democracy has led to great prosperity for its citizens. And regimes which are more authoritarian, generally speaking, I don't think it's always the case, but regimes which, you can look at perhaps some countries in the Middle East that have, lots of natural resources, but generally regimes which are more authoritarian and less open, and their political system is less open to criticism and less open to diverse thought, do not seem to run their countries in a way that leads to greater prosperity. I don't know if I'm simplifying it. It's difficult to square it with China. So I don't know if I'm just putting something out there, really. But then again, the other side of that view would be, well, hang on, when a country doesn't play by the rules of the West will sanction it or invade it. So you either play by the rules and you be part of it, or you don't and you're excluded. But I don't think Chinese citizens are thriving. Dave said China's an exception. Again, I'm just putting out lots of statements. I'm interested to know what people think. Welcome, Alex Racing. So or to put it another way, part of the reason why the West is able to impose these sanctions on Russia and for them to have such an effect is because the West has built its economies to such a scale that you need to play ball to receive the benefits of that global economy. But most countries don't have a problem with that. Just because you have to play ball to be integrated with this kind of globalist economy is not necessarily a bad thing. But what's happened here is Russia has said, we're not going to play ball, and they're being sanctioned. But maybe the way they're not playing ball by invading Ukraine is not a good thing. Says Troy, there are no good sides in this conflict. All sides can be labelled bad acts and weapon. That's a very capital R realistic, real politic way to look at it. Helena, a country is unable to hold its leader accountable to UN law, so it should be helped by UN integrated. I'm not sure about that. I think the UN recognises sovereignty and recognises the ability of nations to determine their own sovereignty. There are lots of dictators that are and have been represented in the United Nations. See if we can get another. There's any tankers up today? Seems to be a bit quieter over Romania. But again, just throwing some more stuff out there. Duke 43. Ooh, whoa, okay. Interesting flight here. Private plane. Private Hawker jet. Registered in Turkey. Flying from Moscow through Belarus and now through Poland. Very unusual plane. Video, I wonder if China feels either emboldened or deterred by how the world has reacted. I don't know. If you inherently believe that people are very tribal and that tribal nature is, you know, the village that you come from or live in, then the town, the region, province, then nation, then maybe conflict is inevitable, I don't know. Jeff, laws are only valid if someone or entity can enforce those laws with force. Search and destroy. Once you realise there is no right side of good guy, you can see the best. Well, what do you think is right? Search and destroy. Great. I like the thought experimentation you're running, tweaking variables of our assumptions to attempt to understand other points of view. I'm actually not sure whether it's possible to understand other points of view. I'm really not sure whether it's really possible to think outside of the context that you're in. I think the only way that could happen if I was sat next to someone who has spent their whole life in Russia and is also interested in kind of geopolitics and international relations, and we were streaming now together. And that's why I think it's sad that the Iron Curtain is coming back up and there will be much less integration, because I think it will make people more tribal, and for Russia, you know, the West is the enemy, and for the West, Russia is the enemy. Now, you always default to confirmation bias. Gary, in Scotland, we had a rule, street, scheme, town, country in that order. Dylan, I think people identify more with locality, but I do not think the want to conquer is natural. Maybe not for individuals, but for their representatives, for example, their locality representatives, they are fighting for resources in terms of maybe tax take allocation. You know, the country is fighting with other countries for, you know, lots of other things as well. Joe says the music during the Cold War was much better than today, so that's one thing to look forward to. Again, it's a very different cultural context, isn't it? And it'll be interesting if we are really going back to that cultural context. Unfortunately, I feel like we are. There's a reality that some of the underlying issues in the Cold War were not finished at the fall of the Soviet Union, and maybe one of them is inherent Russian pride. How do you square, or an inherently proud Russian leader is probably a better way to put it. If anyone sees a B-52, by the way, please do let me know. That's FedEx. $649 people watching. Is that we can do? Maybe we shouldn't. We can say, what are people's best songs from the Cold War to illustrate that point? As I refresh my sources. Yeah, lots of images today about downed Russian planes, real bombardment on the information front. Back in the USSR, coming up a few times. Didn't the Cold War last 40 years? That's a lot of songs, that's true. Still, one of them's come up twice. I feel like Visa and MasterCard going down is probably one of the most significant sanctions, in effect. You'd imagine Russia is going to have to replace a lot of these systems with its own homegrown systems. 99 balloons coming up a lot. Great. If you can figure out the core values of the other side, you might just be able to simulate an understand behavior. I think it feels like it's been a failure in the West to kind of understand, okay, what has Russia been afraid of? What has Russia wanted? Because you'd imagine there was a window after the fall of the Soviet Union where, you know, Russia, as opposed to Soviet Russia, was in turmoil, was rebuilding its nation, was having to, you know, commercialize entities and take things out of state control. And maybe there was too much hands off. I don't know. Maybe there wasn't enough integration. You know, maybe after the Soviet Union there should have been more, student schemes, student exchanges, easier visas, you know, more incentive to travel and kind of, you know, build those connections between the populations as the populations go, hey, we don't want to fight. I've been to that country. I don't want to fight that country. But instead, maybe it's just it never really thawed. Clan Dan Yeltsin, unfortunately, seems to be it was very difficult for Yeltsin to essentially transition the country from, albeit a perestroika communism, into a market economy. Very difficult job for Boris Yeltsin, and you know, the country could have disintegrated really. So he saw Russia through into its constitution. Blackbird says Yeltsin was handed a mess. Yeah, that is a difficult task. Do the world, as being so concerned about China that Russia feels left out, need to prove they're still a major player on the world stage? I think that's a very simplistic and perhaps disrespectful way to look at the war in Ukraine. Brad, should have been a Marshall Plan type policy to in our image. I've heard today, you know, people saying there needs to be in, this is a separate point, but there needs to be in the West a green Manhattan project to drastically and immediately reduce the reliance, say in Europe, on Russian natural resources. Because the Russian economy is heavily centered about the export of natural resources. So once you no longer have to purchase those natural resources, once the dollar value of a barrel of crude oil goes through the floor, then Russia has to come to the table. It's interesting to put it as like a green Manhattan product, because it's like, if I think it's very easy to try and fix mistakes after they've happened, but that would be a preemptive way of trying to bring Russia to the table. And I don't think the Russians are much different to us. We like to play Counter-Strike, we like football, we like series next. I agree, but it's easy. Again, we live in a context. If we were constantly fed negative stories about Russia, then we would feel negative towards Russia. If Russians are constantly fed negative stories about the West, they would feel negative about the West, I think, is my view. I definitely feel like we have less bots today after the YouTube ban. Hey Phil, yeah, we keep an eye on this jet. It's a private jet, maybe a diplomat or something. I don't know. It's very unusual. It is the second most tracked jet on flight radar. Looks to be going towards, you'd imagine, Istanbul, or it's registered there. It's not registered in a low tax jurisdiction like that. So, yeah, there's been a lot of talk about kind of the wider implications. Again, if we go to the specifics of the war, it seems like Russia expected Zelensky to flee, or maybe they had a low percentage chance of eliminating or capturing him on the second day of the war. It seems as though they felt like they would progress easier through the major population centres. Maybe there would be much less resistance. The Ukrainian civilians would be much more welcoming. Maybe the terrain in the north of the country has been more swampy than they expected off the roads, and therefore they've got these backed up armour columns. Maybe they expected to really establish air superiority very quickly, but either the Ukrainians had used decoys at airfields, or taken their planes off the ground unarmed into NATO countries and then flown them back in and rearmed them. But again, it's still early days. Is there a way to see the most tracked aircraft? Yeah. Here, most tracked flights. Harry, we can live without Russian energy. We can find the way. I think there's been a big change in Germany, recognition in Germany that things are going to be more expensive. You know, obviously, Nord Stream 1 exists, so there is a pipeline that goes from Russia over the Baltics into Germany, basically bypassing transit fees and pipelines in Poland and Ukraine. I mean, you could arguably say that a lot of economic growth since the fall of the Soviet Union has been fueled by, inverted commas, cheap gas from Russia. Possibly. Orders, they may not be behind schedule. Desert Storm took about 3 weeks and that was no whole barred. Yep, I agree. We're kind of, it's weird because we're living in it. We've seen the live stream of footage at the nuclear power plant as it was happening. So we're in it and it's time is weird. But today there definitely seems to have been an information blast that Russia is really struggling to achieve its strategic aims. And I don't know what this means for Russia if they are losing this war. Do they have to double down because they have a much bigger and stronger military and it's not all deployed here? Or do they make a tactical retreat? Is there any way that Putin says, in fact, won't do it as an actual poll, but is there any way, does anyone believe there's any chance that if this war doesn't go as well as planned, Putin says, hands up, I miscalculated it, I'm going to stand down, call election? Does anyone believe there's any possibility of that? David, what's the point of flight radar if you can't see fighter jets? We can see fighter jets. They have to turn the transponder on. This is all globally sourced information. If you want to see fighter jets, and I recommend going to your nearest Air Force base. Wow. Jonathan says no. Daniel says no. Philly says no. Mark says no. Kim says not a chance. Katie, no way. Inga's nope. Mark says nope. Scott, nope. Sorry, nope. Yolanda, nope. Kevin, no. No, no. Zero, no, no. No, no, no. So how do you negotiate with that person then? How do you try and broker a compromise with that person on the basis that they will honour it? I think there is a chance, by the way. I don't think it's a 0% chance. I think it's pretty close to 0, but you can't, that's the problem. No way. You don't, you can't. Concessions. So I think it's another question as to what Putin's, I think, 67 or 69. What motivates you at 69 years old? Fingers crossed I'm a long way off there, but what motivates you at 69 years old? So is he determined to be remembered as a great leader of Russia? And he felt that was missing from his obituary before. Legacy, legacy, legacy. It's funny that's not coordinated. Legacy, 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 power. Legacy, legacy. Wow, that is these are the only points we've really ever had consensus on in these streams, right? No chance of standing down. No chance of negotiating, really. And believing that, and it's about legacy. That's the most consent. We've been doing these streams for 10 days, possibly over 1 million views over the streams. I don't know, and that's the first time we've had, I think, consensus. Whereas if you think about Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, you'd think he'd be much more likely to negotiate. You'd think he'd be much more likely to make concessions. That's just my perspective. You'd think he'd be much more likely to stand down if it was the right thing for Ukraine. That's just my perception. And does that make him in a weaker negotiating position? Because he looks weaker on those things. It's a bit of a paradox. I'll take that as sarcasm, Dylan. Christopher, what an awful consensus for us to have. I do agree. Caroline's Mercantile, yes, he could pull out under a fabricated scenario, for example, that he was successful and that most of his goals were accomplished. That's the way that we've been thinking about what is the de-escalatory off-ramp, really? And it has to be some concessions that Putin can take back in message. for example, Ukraine won't join NATO, some sort of agreement signed. Recognition of Russia as recognition of Crimea as Russian territory, recognition of the independence of Donbass regions, maybe change in the government. Katie, will his people also be tried for the crime? It depends. You only get tried for crimes if you lose, really. Think about Slobodan. Lorraine, speaker, are you for Putin? Does that mean me? Do I sound like I'm for Putin? Have you been watching the same streams? Pilkey, Putin's opposition licking lips. Unfortunately, Putin's biggest opposition is in jail under trial at the moment. Yep, Duke 43 is just a helicopter. It's just always here. This flight is actually very interesting because of the path it's taken. But I think it's just going to go straight to Istanbul now. We can do it on the multi-select. I can't see any... Can anyone see any refueling tankers? I can't see any Western refueling tankers, either RAF or US Air Force. I may be wrong. Desert Season, the Ukrainian ambassador Jeremy said there will be a diplomatic solution eventually, but at the moment the Russian demands are so unacceptable that you don't even sit down to negotiate. I think that the unique thing here is that it's pretty clear that Russia wants to remove the head of state in Ukraine. So basically, the head of state in Ukraine is a target for assassination. So again, that impacts negotiation. How do you negotiate in that position personally? L1's on the way to the UK. Let me put that in. John, thanks for the heads up. I don't know what's particularly interesting about that plane, I'm afraid. Maybe I missed something. Suzanne is hoping for globalist agenda to be stopped, though. Jeff, negotiations, lip service, neither side will back down. You'd think in this situation, Ukraine would really want a de-escalation because its citizens are being killed every day. So it's in a terrible, horrible position to be in. And therefore, every day the war goes on, you know, Russia will come with demands and say, if you agree to these demands, the war will stop. You seem to be talking a lot about the UAE, David. I don't know what you're trying. Just say what you're trying to say. It's okay. You don't need to beat around the bush. Okay, Phil. Maybe they're not on flight radar tonight. It's so weird to see that empty Europe without planes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the no-fly zone was much smaller at the beginning of the war a week ago. But now it's a huge, like, one of these things, inverted commas, visible from space. You realise just how big Ukraine is, really. Can you check the Russian plane that just picked up the Russians from Washington Embassy? If you have a registration number, then 100% we can track it. Hulk Smash, how is everybody so chill when WW3 is imminent? On this stream, I think for the last 10 days, we talk about everything kind of calmly and rationally, and, you know, it's very unlikely that we're close to World War III, in my opinion. Yeah, we went through that speech, Betsy. Should we go through it again, actually? Now, because we did it on the very first thing we did on the first stream was go through that speech. Bear with me. Okay, I can't get onto kremlin.ru. Which is where I had the transcript from. It's being cached. Actually, that's a... Yeah, bear with me. Just bear with me a second. See if this will load. Actually, this week has shown our failure to teach history in the last 30-50 years. I think it's perhaps shown lack of awareness of these issues. Thanks, Martin. Let me put that in. Yeah, I couldn't load that page. Is this RTB? No, it's going out. Okay. Spot. Commander says NATO is irrelevant. I have to disagree. I don't think NATO's been more relevant for the last 50 years than right now. 15. Hang on a second. I don't think I'm going to be able to get this up. I'm afraid. I can try. Katie, I'm still horrified but less shocked by it. I vaguely remember Kira asking if anyone was becoming desensitized. Yeah, I think I asked a couple of nights ago if people were becoming desensitized. Christopher, it feels like the last week has been a decade's worth of international relations crowd in a few days. You could say that these international relations have always been happening. They've just come to the fore. It's funny, isn't it, how you can look at it. Okay, I've got it up on Bloomberg. Okay, wait a second. So this is the speech on, I think, the dawn of the war, and this is the first thing that we went through when we started doing these streams. So if you want to try and, it's an important context, whether you believe it or not, the points or not, it's still important to know what points Putin felt was important to get across. So, I spoke about our biggest concerns and worries and about the fundamental threats from year to year. I'm referring to the eastward expansion of NATO. So the first reason he gives here is eastward expansion of NATO. So that appears to be the main reason. Also, he talks about other reasons. Now, I remember reading this and being a bit shocked because I'd never really thought about the eastward expansion of NATO. So, anyway, last 30 years, been trying to come to agreement with NATO countries regarding security in Europe. Again, not sure because thanks, John, for the 125, I don't know what, and the sticker. Hope you enjoyed the stream. Because these relationships weren't bad with NATO until I would say about, I don't know, a bit more than 10 years ago. But again, obviously I haven't been that up to speed with it. In response to our proposal, we faced either cynical deception and lies or attempts at pressure and blackmail whilst NATO continued to expand. It's a military machine moving and approaching our border. So again, you can see the Russian perspective that as more countries in the east of Europe join NATO, then NATO as a military faction gets closer to Moscow. So maybe there was carelessness, I don't know, with statements made about Ukraine joining NATO, or maybe it was calculated, I don't know, but the consequences seem to have contributed to this point. The answer is simple. He talks about a failure of the Soviet Union here. They lost confidence in it for any one moment. This bit was interesting, and this I predicted would lead to rejections of existing treaties by Russia. And I do think there is a pathway now where Russia will be either ejected or will leave the United Nations, which I think will severely and possibly fatally weaken it, I don't know. Welcome, Griff. Hope you're enjoying the stream. It looks like a great chat today, by the way. Anything that does not suit the dominant state and powers that be is denounced as archaic, obsolete, and useless. At the same time, everything that regards as useful is presented as ultimate truth and forced on others regardless of cost. Those who refuse to comply are subjected to rights. So, I think this is what I touched on earlier. Kind of a perception that even soft projection of soft power by the West is strong arm tactics. Does not concern only Russia, it's the entire system of international relations. And basically the hegemony of the United States being the world's policeman. Instead, we saw a state of euphoria created by the feeling of absolute superiority, a kind of modern absolutism coupled with low cultural standards and arrogance. I feel this is a kind of almost jealousy, and this is a bit where like every McDonald's that opened in Moscow would have been painful to Putin, it seems. Thanks, Christopher, for the sticker for the $5. Again, hope you enjoy the stream. So yeah, this is the very first thing we did 10 years ago. 10 streams ago, and we're coming back to this speech. There are many examples. So we talk about Kosovo situation. So this is talking about or highlighting Western hypocrisy. So when the United Nations Security Council doesn't vote, they don't speak about international law, and the West speaks about what they believe should happen. Iraq, Libya, and Syria. So these are pain points for the West, really. So again, pointing out Western hypocrisy. I think also a statement to, the third countries that are not in NATO. So just any countries that are not, for example, in NATO and are not Russia. Hey, you could be next. Just this is where things are going. This is what is being purported, I think. Same with Syria. No UN Security Council approval. Then talk about Iraq and intelligence, etc. So again, pointing out all of, you could say, different ways of looking at it, pointing out mistakes that the West has made, and will then use that as a justification to reject the international framework. Promises not to expand NATO eastwards. So, for example, agreements in Ukraine. I always find this interesting about kind of Russian... Russia often makes this point. It will take... So, this point here, in the West, it seems as though there is free speech, and it seems as though you can disagree, and it seems as though in the United States, sometimes you have a Republican president or Congress, and sometimes you have a Democratic president or Congress, and they have different viewpoints. The same in other Western nations. And people disagree, etc. And in Russia, United Russia dominates the elections. Putin has been either president or prime minister for 22 years. And what he's saying here is because there is diversity of thought and expression in the United States, that he is agreeing with those thoughts that align with his views. Whereas you wouldn't have that diversity of views in the Russian Duma, for example. I don't know if anyone else... It's interesting. I don't know, it's again another double think thing that in order to have free speech, you will have different views of opinion. And then you kind of, if you live in a country, let's say, doesn't have as much free speech, you use those dissenting viewpoints to bolster your side. So I find that interesting. United States is still a great country. All its satellites just do what it says. The Western Bloc formed by the US is an empire. So again, he says there are dissenting views in the United States. Some people say it's an empire of lies. I agree with that. But there's no one in Russian politics who would say that Russia is an empire of lies. If that makes sense. Apparently Russia was... the West tried to finish it off and destroy it. Chechnya. Seems quite domestic. Those who aspire to global dominance have publicly designated Russia as their enemy. Russia is one of the most powerful nuclear states. This is the bit about nuclear weapons being on the table. Again, back to NATO expansion. NATO is a tool of US foreign policy. Again, if NATO is a tool of US foreign policy, most NATO members don't have a big problem with it, or B, still believe in their self-determination to, at points, not agree with what the United States wants to do. So I'm just going through this at the moment. Then Donbass. Obviously some very controversial statements in here about neo-Nazis. And this was, I think, a day after the Russian parliament had recognised the request for assistance from the province of Donetsk and Luhansk. It's not our plan to occupy... Okay, here we go. I haven't been back to this for 10 days. The purpose of this operation is to protect people who for 8 years now have been facing humiliation and genocide perpetrated by the Kyiv regime. It is not our plan to occupy the Ukrainian territory. We do not intend to impose anything on anyone by force. The current events have nothing to do with desire to infringe on the interests of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. They are connected with the defending of Russia, I guess, from those who have taken Ukraine hostage. I reiterate, we are acting to defend ourselves. I'm asking you, however hard this may be, to understand this and to work together with us to move forward together. I want to emphasize again that all responsibility for the possible bloodshed will lie fully and wholly with the ruling Ukrainian regime. This is about nuclear threats. One of the most interesting speeches of modern times, and one of the most significant in my view. Yeah, and today he said the sanctions are like declaring war. Almost baiting NATO, really. It's a bit like if anyone's been in a fight. If you get into a fight with someone who looks really crazy, you think, hang on, how far are they going to take this? Maybe I should just back out. Katie, the sanctions aren't new. It's taken how long to say. That's a great point, Katie. The sanctions have been there for probably, what, 8 days now? And it's the first time that that's been publicly kind of messaged. What is the intention of it? This is the other thing, right? If Russia's taking moral high ground, or took moral high ground for what happened in Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. Actually, they didn't mention Afghanistan because Security Council resolution, I think. But what happened in Libya, Syria and Iraq? If they've taken the moral high ground, then they've just, by their own logic, they have reduced themselves to, they are no longer on the moral high ground themselves. We'll now own one military aircraft showing on ADS, very quiet, all gone off. Again, I don't know. We've got Duke 43 still out there. I don't know where that tanker is. Oh yeah, he's still outbound, I think, from Mildenhall. Yeah. But definitely different on the transponder side of things. Yep, we got that mojo is here. Actually, it is financial warfare without a doubt. Again, it's the lines are blurring, right? It's NATO wants Ukraine to win in this conflict. It wants to support Ukraine as much as it can without being involved in a war against Russia. What if Russia calls its bluff and says, "Hey, you're now involved"? What are you going to do about it? JP, if you notice, many helis are overseas looking for subs. Turkey's getting pushed, but they stay strong. I don't know about that, to be honest. So can I see what I've got here? Zelensky's just tweeted that he's spoken with Elon Musk about possible space projects after the war. That's how you know we're entering 2022. Ingot, if Russia wins the war, there'll be a free referendum in Ukraine. The ultimate irony would be if Russia, inverted commas, wins the war and there is a election, and let's say that because of how the war's gone, that election is independently overseen, and the people overwhelmingly vote for a Western-leaning government, then what happens? It's impossible. You know, you would think it's unacceptable for that to happen to Moscow. But the thing is that Moscow purports to play by these democratic rules. You know, Moscow's justification in that statement was that this government is illegitimate. NATO EU may back up because of recession. Jedi, this financial warfare against Russia will backfire. Did you lose your icon, Jedi? Rebel, Rob Stratton, fair enough. I tend to think most people do understand that there isn't endless freedom living within any apparatus or any state, but take your point. I mean, for any people living in a state, you know, you are bound by rules, things you can and cannot do. So there are, if you think about your freedoms in nature, yeah, we all live by limits on our freedoms, but the idea is that those limits on our freedoms mean that everyone lives in a society, because otherwise your right to do something infringes with another person's right to not have something done to them. Welcome, Brain. 234 says, we live in a free democracy because we're all tolerant. This is another point about, can liberal democracy ever really win in a conflict against a more authoritarian state apparatus? Will the liberal democracy inherently always bend? Inherently always concede? Because it's in its DNA. Otherwise it's not a liberal democracy. Thanks, Zach. Thomas, Russian-speaking people in East Ukraine don't agree with their current government, but they don't impart Russia. I'm sure there's lots of people in the eastern parts of Ukraine that do want to, you know, want to, I don't know what the word is, but be under that Russian sphere of influence. Search and destroy. I can't, as an American, judge another country and say they are bad. My whole government is corrupt and insane. Again, even if you think your own government is corrupt, it doesn't stop you from... You can still have a view on what is right and wrong here. You can still have that view. Maybe the transponder's off here, actually. Yeah, it looks like it actually did RTB. There may be some bigger picture in mind that is perceived as morally sound and the evils committed together are justified. What do you mean by that? Nicholas, yes, history tends towards democracy. Perhaps only recently. They've gone through like kind of feudalist systems and, you know, free suffrage is relatively recent in, well, very recent, depending on how far you zoom out, I would say. Harry, if the fools in charge do not cause nuclear war, whatever the outcome, I will consider it a win for the common people. I'm not going to play that video here in intent. You can find it online if you want. Griff, democracy is only as good as the leader in charge of the plan. Anarchy being in NATO is extremely profitable. Was profitable for NATO. JS, keep your enemies closer. We failed to do so here. Tom, Ukraine didn't have democracy. Russia not bringing democracy. EU saying goodbye to democracy the past few years. Interesting in what way the EU has said goodbye to democracy in the last few years. Well, but you'll never appease everyone. You just have to find a happy medium. That is true. You know, in most democracies, you know, the elected leader might not have a majority of the votes. They might have a plurality of the votes. Plurality. More people may have voted against them, depending on the electoral system. Hulk Smash, when is it time to panic in the United States? I don't think anyone in the United States has to panic, to be honest. Welcome, Heather. So the EU's never been about democracy. I mean, there's different parts to the EU kind of system. You have the EU Commission. You have the Council of Europe. Then you have the EU Parliament. Jacob, I heard there's been heavy shelling in centre Kyiv. I'm not sure. We've got cameras on Kyiv here, so you can see the cameras. Ingus, would you be interested if I took some propaganda videos from Russian media and translated them? Yeah, 100%. Daniel, the stalled convoy has a lot of buffering scratching their heads. Yep, I mean, it may just be purely logistics. They may not be able to take these tracked vehicles off the roads. And if it's blocked up, if they expected to establish a forward base at this airport and it's not happening, and if the Ukrainian Air Force still has some level of operational ability, Florentia, how true they're stalled? Yeah, it's true. They could just be waiting. It's true. I don't know. See, Brian. Nikki Bears, anyone had the idea that Putin might work on different timescale? Yeah, we've thought about that in terms of the rationale for authorizing the invasion and why now. Jacob, America has brought Warthog A10s. I'm pretty sure that wouldn't have happened. America's been very clear that it does not want to get involved in this directly militarily. Of course, they're supplying us the ordnance and other supplies to Ukraine. Was there any way to see RT in the UK? I don't know. I don't know if they'll still have an English language broadcast. I don't know to what extent that's necessary anymore. Luke, what's been happening seems like it's all slowing down. Definitely more discussions on context, how this plays out. Ukrainian president is tweeting at the moment. Negotiation talks are going to continue. Welcome, David. So when the cost of Russian forces going into Kyiv and engaging in an urban house-to-house engagement is going to be absolutely astronomical. Yep, agreed. That's a difficult stomach in this day and age that one man can have such power that affects so many lives. I think that is perhaps one of the constants through human history in terms of nations, is that power tends to, from time to time, concentrate in one man. And that's why the separation of powers in kind of liberal democracy, I think, is seen as so important to prevent that concentration. Search and Troy, banning RT, banning free speech. I'm a little bit surprised that the European Union banned Russia Today. I said this before, that, you know, their English language broadcasts haven't seemed particularly sophisticated in the way that they've tried to present issues. It seemed fairly ham-fisted and not that sophisticated. And the people that subscribe to if there's a presentation of numerous facts and footage that would, you know, indicate something is true, and Russia Today would present it and say, oh, this is fake, the people that really want to believe that's fake will think it's fake anyway. So I don't think Russia Today really changed anyone's minds on anything. I may be wrong. And obviously, by banning Russia Today, the obvious retaliation was going to be that Russia would ban Western news outlets. I think it would be great if, you know, the different outlets were still available on both sides. But again, that's just my context. Yeah, I saw that, Joseph, but the Ukrainian president just spoken with Elon Musk. Brad, the Russian propaganda fills a hole of distrust in Western systems. That is a really interesting way of putting it, actually. That's a really interesting way of putting it. I think what's going to be interesting is a lot of Western individuals like journalists and politicians who have been associated with Russia Today, what that does to their credibility. But yeah, that I can't remember who came and said, you know, how's, you know, what's it looking like, and it's definitely very different to, you know, literally last weekend, which is 7 days ago. 7 days ago, it was very different. I don't know if we're becoming desensitized. I don't know if it's becoming more the status quo that, yes, Ukraine has been invaded, and we are desensitized to more of the shocking images that we see every day. I don't know if it's the reality that Kyiv hasn't fallen. I don't know if it's because we've had time to process the situation. I don't know if it's because we know more about Article 5 and mutually assured destruction and, you know, the defense mechanisms for this to not flare into World War III. But it definitely feels like there's more time and space and rationality to discuss what's going on. To all the people that say that mainstream media is propaganda, where do you get your news from? It's not a loaded question. It's just where do you get your news from? So if you because traditionally people would watch mainstream media to get the news. So if you don't watch it because you believe that it's propaganda, where do you get your news from? Says there's been a logistical disaster. That's what a lot of Western generals seem to be saying. People that I think would know about, you know, how much they'd expect this to progress. Miss Sandwich, I think one thing we're learning is that it's harder to get into World War III than we thought. Yep. Thanks, John. Oh yeah, that is a Italian plane. Very interesting. Jonathan Higdon, free speech is a confusing issue. Many Americans and even new organizations who claim to support free speech would love to silence those with opposing views and make them outcasts in society. I get my views from listening to people involved, not reporters. It's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. I feel like in a Western liberal democracy, there is space for different viewpoints, which is why I actually think it was disappointing that Russia Day was banned, even though their coverage just seems very unsophisticated in what they're trying to present and portray. But I feel like there's enough inverted commas mainstream news surely in any liberal Western democracy for people to get inverted commas both sides of the argument. And a wholehearted rejection of inverted commas mainstream media is, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of good journalists who studied to be journalists and trained, and at some point I don't know what they do to say they're going to be independent, but must believe that. And I wonder what those journalists are going to do if they're no longer able to present. Maybe they will go on Twitter and stuff like that. So maybe they will work less for these big companies. I think also, as people, we probably like to hear things that we agree with, I suspect. So if we are listening to things we don't disagree with, we're less likely to watch and listen to that. So if you're cynical about just the general state and corporations, then maybe you wouldn't want to listen to the those news organizations. News organizations. Thanks, John. Oh, very nice. Recon Electronics platform in the 767. I wonder where it's going to. Techno got you on max. Yeah, sorry, let me know anyone else if I'm too quiet. I can turn it up. Because, for example, I think in Russia, especially now that a lot of other news organizations have been closed down, you don't have the option to get as much variety of news sources. You don't have CNN and Fox and NBC and whatever. Okay, cool. Thanks, David. So the main way to question that would be if you think the whole system is biased. The whole system is biased towards Western interests and to exploit, other countries for either resources or political gain. If you are or believe that kind of neo-colonialist theory. And in a way, that is what Russia is, what Putin was saying in that speech, is that the entire international framework is just to do whatever the United States wants to do. But it seems to be that most countries don't have a problem with that. Even in a real politics sense. That is not a bad way to exist. Your citizens can prosper. You can have elections. So what would the alternative be if Russia was the world's policeman? I don't know. MG, he's not entirely wrong, I loathe to admit. It's a really difficult one. The other thing that I think is important is that news is commercialized, and that doesn't matter whether you're on what platform. So a lot of news outlets or corporations, get advertising revenue, and that's how they, pay their employees. This stream has adverts. So this stream is part of that. YouTube is a platform that wants to show adverts. So there's that factor as well. And if you subscribe to the fact that money talks, then you can have a look at kind of where the money is flowing into these news organizations, and are organizations therefore incentivized to come up with sensationalist stories and create and manufacture controversy. So that I can see has an economic derivative to it. But I do think there is a wide variety of reporting, and I do think, like doctors swear an oath, they will, seek to save the lives of their patients. I believe that, there probably is quite a lot of journalistic integrity. Welcome G, Williams Roofing Specialist Limited. Not sure what that means. Joseph, by blocking YouTube and other Western news in Russia, the Russian people will only be able to see Russian propaganda. Yeah, and I'm one of the things I am for is integration. And, if everyone in the stream had been to Russia, maybe we would see things differently. And if everyone in Russia had been to the West at one point, inverted commas West, maybe things would be different, and maybe people would see more of the things that we have in common. Because when you haven't been somewhere, or it's easy for them to be portrayed as aliens, and a bit like people are afraid of the night, you're kind of afraid of what you don't know. Thanks, Victor. Okay, that's a statement. Oh, we had a bot. We had a Western bot though. A webcam chat bot. Refueling it. Let me get that up. Couldn't find it. I failed. I apologise. Duke's up there. Duke's just chilling. He's been chilling there every day. Interesting that it keeps transponder on because you imagine there'd be many more of these helicopters up in the air. Robert Stretton, why do we need a world police? We should just let countries live how they want and not enforce our way of life on them. It's a very fundamental question. The idea is that you need a world policeman to protect other nations' sovereignty, ironically. So if one nation goes rogue and invades another country, then they are stopped by the world's policeman and an example is set to the rest of the world. There's been a lot of analysis about that. Oh, okay, thanks, Phil. MG, I'm fascinated by the differences between the strange American system, the pyramid Russian power system, and the current democratic system in the EU. Yeah. The differences at the moment, this is the difference from the Soviet Union, is that at the moment Russia purports to have a democratic system with a two-house parliament and a president. But the constitution has been heavily amended to concentrate powers on the president. Sorry if that was loud. Thanks. See if the webcam is live. Yeah, it is live. Welcome shooting. Actually won a lot of races tonight. Keen, if US quit, he will be the next police. The idea of there being a world's policeman has only existed since the fall of the Soviet Union. So we've only had 30 years of this concept of having a world policeman ever in human history. And what Putin was saying in a statement is that it didn't work with what happened and Kosovo. Welcome, Gavin. Let us know how did you find this channel, Gavin? So I don't really put anything in the description. Let me know if the siren is too loud or not. Obviously. You can't turn it down if you're in Kyiv. Dylan, Britain definitely saw itself as a world policeman, even though we now see it colonialism. It's slightly different because, yes, Britain had a very large empire, but it couldn't do exactly what it wanted, although you could say, yeah, that's a good point, actually. Okay, we'll turn it down. So it's difficult for me to tell with the siren. T-Mac says Rome was the world's policeman at one time. Most of the world wasn't known by Rome. So I'd have to disagree with that. Oh, thanks, Kara. It's good to know. I just feel like if you told someone in I don't know, 1997 or something, that in 2022 Russia would be, you know, invading Ukraine and we're the closest we've ever been to World War III, it would possibly be surprising. Welcome, Dre. That's true. Known civilized world. For the Romans. Luca would have thought that would set up sirens, so I missed whatever that was. So I do disagree with that point. Let me know what points? That's true. That's true, David. Jonathan, what do you think the red line have crossed? What do you think is the red line? It's difficult to tell whether there's anything that can... nuclear power plants, any use of tactical nuclear weapons, breaches of the Geneva Convention. I don't know, but it seems that if Russia was to win this war conventionally, and it's kind of an awful way to put it, but fairly in terms of Geneva Convention, etc., then it seems like NATO would tolerate that loss of Ukraine. What would happen if Russia later was to be aggressive with a NATO member, but one of the smaller NATO members? Don't know. I'm not sure. I'm refreshing. You know, they may expect an air raid. I don't know if that was on the minute at midnight or 1 a.m. in Ukraine. Choose it. Yeah, sorry, 2 a.m. in Ukraine. Geneva Convention being broken though. That's true. Jacob, not NATO has tolerated a lot so far. Helena, they've already taken down a Malaysian airline for going down Geneva past. Yep, that's a good point. Those are very good points. Although, you know, they've disputed all of those. I think the ICC is gathering evidence, but I'd imagine those sort of things take a long time. I don't know what blocked aircraft is actually, I'm afraid. On flight radar. Tuna, that seems to be exactly how this will go down. Russia will take Ukraine through conventional force, as you put it. NATO will not intervene short of some extraordinary events. Yeah. I imagine the NATO are really praying, okay, what is the reality of you know, Ukraine either occupied or essentially controlled by Russia? What is the next step? How can NATO prevent the next step? And is it preventing the next step a heavy escalation of armed forces along NATO's eastern front? Is that the answer? Okay, it's before the hour. I have an MG now. Brad says, thanks for the EU insight. As an American, I don't know as much as I should about it. Maybe it's that time of the stream. We do it every stream. So if you want to, let us know where in the world you're watching from. I'd say if there was a way that it could be aggregated, I'd say the USA is always the country that has the most people watching. But let us know where in the world you're from. It's always very, very interesting. Yeah, and if you do want to hit that like button as well, you can do. It just means that I think YouTube probably shares the stream a bit more. Got 600 people watching and 100 and something likes. Can't see how many exactly. But it's up to you. Jessica's watching from Orlando. Jessica's first in today. Det Poker Club still here from Brazil. Chris from US. Brabant from Holland. Brad USA. Dylan Ireland. Rich Bulgaria. POV Trucking from Germany. Tuna from the Midwestern USA. The Mighty Germany. Mark's from Exeter. Cameron Australia. Katie's England. Mark D Wales. Gil's from Portugal. Helen's from Netherlands. Headcase from USA. Stan from Norwich. Luke from Dorset. Tracker from USA. Adam USA. Soren Denmark. Peter New Zealand. Susan USA. Techno Wells. Tina USA. Ian UK. Mark Suffolk. Caesarina Minnesota. Robert King Wyoming. Havers from Norway. Brad's from a town of like 900 people. I think that's USA though. Noel's from Seattle. Ulrich from Sweden. Welcome, York. John's from North Carolina. Marcus from Second Trent. Jude from Canada. Dietis from Denmark with a bird. Rebels from Wales. Beyondis from Greenland. Ayus from London. Cesar's from Romania. Border with Ukraine. Let us know what the feeling is there in terms of the Romanian sentiment at the moment. Maxwell from Sweden. Woodlace Horizons from Africa. Samunda. Don't know where that is. Sonya's from Montreal. Nathan's from Northampton. Southgate's out from Devon. Yannick's from Cambridge. Richard's from Germany. I'm in London. Daniel's from Trinidad. Josh from Detroit. Orlando, South Africa. Jolanda, Netherlands. Der from Ottawa. Phil from Sussex. DJ's from more Netherlands. Self-paid New Jersey. Soren Denmark. Ben Northampton. T-Mac from Philadelphia. Sarti's from UK. Then we've got Finland. More Denmark. Belgium. Puerto Rico. Australia. Antarctica. California. Yeah, quite a few Danish people actually. Maybe Danish people are particularly interested in this. Looks like the US embassy in Russia has just issued a advisory, or maybe it's not that recent, but has issued an advisory saying that, as in like it was a couple of hours ago, asking all non-essential personnel to leave. I think I saw that a bit earlier. Prime Minister of Israel has spoken with Vladimir Putin and the Ukrainian president tonight, it seems. Matthew Burton's just south of Mildenhall, probably. You hearing these big tanker jets take off? Rebel says a worrying amount of Danes, another raid incoming. I don't know. See Det Poker Club, hope all is well in Brazil. Techno, I noticed it went from an invasion to a war and then a conflict in BBC. That may have been because of the recent change in Russia, I don't know, and they still have journalists on the ground there. I'm not sure. You can see now it says war in Ukraine. I think Coca-Cola was pulled out. I think they said they wouldn't and then they have, or something like that. David Wavy said this is sad for the UK. Why do you think it's sad for the UK, David? Lou's been hearing a lot of jets. Yeah, I don't know if you've noticed more activity or there's always this presence. I don't know if tankers are taking off from Mildenhall all the time to establish this kind of refueling place over Romania. To the point of stopping Russia's next move, they want to maintain a neutral buffer from NATO, so NATO could stop all of this by saying, okay, we'll not allow the membership. I said yesterday, I don't think NATO would want Ukraine as a member. I think NATO would want Ukraine as a buffer state. So the ultimate question of NATO is that if a NATO member genuinely gets invaded, are they going to recognise Article 5? Essentially, sorry, let me rephrase that. If Russia invades a NATO member, if NATO doesn't invoke Article 5, NATO is weak, and, you know, in reality, not every NATO member is treated equally. If NATO does recognise it, then it's saying, okay, we're going to start World War III. So by having Ukraine as a buffer state, you don't have to answer that question. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I don't get the sense many are very interested in debate as many don't know what to say about it. Is that a specific debate? Top chat. There is an incredible amount of fog of war here. You know, we get certain information come through, certain footage, videos, photos, reports, but there is so much of a fog of war, what is actually happening on the ground. Because the NATO wouldn't be starting there. Kind of doesn't matter when NATO starts or retaliate, it's just a acceptance by NATO that Article 5 has been invoked would be a acceptance that World War III has begun. And, you know, there are many kind of chain reactions from that. So, if NATO did accept an Article 5 invocation, what does China do? What does India do? You know, what do they do? Do they think Russia's too weak against a conventional war with NATO, and that a conventional war with NATO can exist with no nuclear weapons used? Do they see an opportunity to kind of reshape the world order in a real politics sense, according to their interests? Are we thinking about this at too small a level, and when you zoom out, actually, there's many things that can happen? I don't know. That's the thing, we just don't know. Gavin, is drone Forte 10? We haven't seen Forte 10 today, actually. No sign of Forte 10 today. Some days it hasn't been having the transponder on. Jedi Masters, China and Russia rivals NATO plus USA. I'm not sure in a military sense, actually. Conventional military sense. China's troops haven't really seen any material action, unlike NATO troops that have seen considerable action, and Russian troops as well. Thomas says Turkey supports both EU and NATO enlargement for Ukraine. Brad, but if you make the sanctions too drastic, it becomes a life or death situation, then you never know what will happen. That's true. See, Katie? Hopefully this is a bit more of a, I don't want to say relaxed, but a bit more of a relaxed pace than it was last weekend, which is a good thing. I think, Marcus, you yeah. Okay, I believe the mass refugee crisis leaving Ukraine out for Western Ukraine shows that the buffer state strategy doesn't actually stabilise the region. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how destabilising that will be to Western countries. It's about an alternative. Let's say, for example, that Ukraine was a NATO member, and let's say that Russia really does have this strong security issue because NATO's borders are so close. You know, what happens if Russia tests the waters with Ukraine? Thanks, John McCormick, for the 250 P's. Read China, your thoughts. Will China move on Taiwan with all the wires in Ukraine? I don't think so. But it comes up from time to time. Obviously, there is this in a similar way that there is an unsettled question here. We know there is an unsettled question with Taiwan and mainland China, in terms of mainland China seeing Taiwan as part of its territory, and Taiwan seeing itself as the exiled government of China. I hope not. But this is the thing when things escalate. And I don't know if Taiwan is a part of any defense pacts or... but when things escalate and another country sees an opportunity to do something because something has been tolerated, the kind of goalposts have changed. So all I can say is I hope not. I don't really know, I'm afraid. Philippines peso. Thank you very much for the 250 Filipino pesos. Thanks, Katie. Welcome, G. So in 2014 was Putin and Russia's test of NATO resolved. NATO failed. Yeah. I think I'm probably guilty of this very strongly. I think there's this presumption that big states know what they're doing. They must know what they're doing. They think about stuff, they calculate it, they work out how things could be different, they come up with a plan, and they broadly understand what they're doing. And so if you subscribe to that, or that's the way that you've thought about things, then it would be very shocking for Russia to have made such a big miscalculation here in terms of the solidarity and strength of sanctions they've received, in terms of the losses they have and are suffering, in terms of the almost universal condemnation. So, but miscalculations are always made. And again, depending on your political system, it might be more conducive to miscalculations. Can you please zoom in on the Polish-Ukraine border? Okay. Tina, I do believe that the threat of force over NATO's membership speaks volumes to Russian intention here, particularly Ukraine right now. Yeah. Just want to say, everyone, I think that the chat has been I think, the most respectful chat we've ever had. People with opinions on completely different sides. People are talking with each other, and it's not like other streams where you just shout with people that think the same thing as you and you'll shout to yourselves, or you come up with a different opinion and you get banned. So big credit to everyone in this chat and in this, I don't know if it's a community. I have a sim racing community of thousands of people, but in this community it really is very special. Thanks, Stefan, for the 100 Swedish krona, I believe. I may be wrong. And it's just nice. It kind of, it's just nice. And I believe that I try and be neutral, and I believe that I try and understand that I am limited by my context, and I try and think about things in a different context. That's really what I try and do. But one of the things I do really believe, actually, is I do really believe that just having people speaking to each other, just visiting different countries you can, just is a good thing. I feel like the less that happens, the more people become distrustful of each other. It's easier to think to blame things on other people. And sometimes just speaking with someone who has a different point of view is enlightening. And maybe good ideas win out, maybe bad ideas win out. I don't know. But I just feel like it's... Yeah, so... Technically, people can talk and discuss in a friendly way. People could be like this. It wouldn't be war. I don't know. It depends if you're a idealist or a real politic person. If you're a real politic person, you would perhaps use those discussions to understand about, inverted commas, the enemy, or not necessarily in those terms, but understand what you should do absolutely in your state's best self-interest. If you're more of an idealist, you might see, okay, well, what can we do that's going to, raise the tide for both of us? So that's a very deep question about how states and people behave. For Putin, it's about gas, Matt Burner said. Martin, the most scary thing would be that all the propaganda turned out to be right. Yolanda says, live blog lure is, I must say, with the Dutch news, repeating the same time as time. I actually did not watch any TV talk show or news after the start of the war. MMG, I just hope the world shows the same energy when it happens in non-white countries. Guess you mean countries that are not in Europe. Yeah, maybe this will cast a light on, if you are the world's policeman, then any exercise of that power, is noticed by other countries. Maybe if you are the world's policeman, you need to be less interventionist. I don't know. There's no time or space right now to really think about that. There's an irony. If you're a liberal democracy, you probably believe that good ideas do win out. That good ideas will lead to economic growth and happy citizens. And therefore, if you believe that, then you shouldn't need to invade. You just present your ideas. I don't know. Thanks, John, for the 250 Filipino pesos, Nano. You're good because you inform us what is now happening, not why it's happening. Objectively appreciate it. Maybe I don't know enough to actually have a strong opinion. Maybe I'm in that unique space. Martin, the Russian convoy is a creation of the media. They are just supply troops who attack vehicles, not amongst them. I don't know, to be fair. It's possible. Only a Sith deals in absolutes. Classic. So it's midnight UK time. We're going to go till 1. The last few days I've streamed till... I think I streamed till 4 AM. Then I streamed till 3 AM. And today I promised myself I'm going to stream till 1 AM. Just because I don't want to... think I've leaned very hard into streaming late and I don't want to... Because I now see bare tanks and some pictures there, mates. Adam Medea, I can say that by listening to you on the stream and reading others' comments, I've opened my mind up more to those differing opinions. It's something I've always struggled with. It's like, do we always really have a certain opinion and really will never change our mind? And that certain opinion has to be because of context. Because when we're born, we don't speak any language. We don't have any cultural norms. You could say the only thing we really have is probably the colour of our skin that we're born with. But in terms of other factors, we don't have a language, we don't have a cultural identity. And we pick all that up in the context of where we've grown up, where we're educated. And to what extent can you really have a different perspective? Daniel, back in 2015, I visited Poland. Many of the people I had interactions with while I was there were very nervous about Russia, and lots of young people were leaving, heading over to the UK. Gavin, I saw reports today saying Russian troops are using old Soviet gear and weapons and being used kind of full. I don't know, and I don't know to what extent, if that is true, whether it's a strategic decision that is a good strategic decision because it's going to be, degrading the Ukrainian defense forces. Max West, agree, NATO only has members that ask to be part of it. I'm in the UK and I only do this stuff in the evenings. Sim racing is my hobby, which is why I've got all this gear. Emo Essence, I don't wish war, but more I think about each time we hit a tech evolution, war most of the time be very influential. Are you saying that you think war is inevitable with tech evolutions? Helena, we are born with genetic reality and get fed with mimetic identity, but in the end we are seeds of the earth manipulating the soil we grow in, and we should nurture it so we don't wither. Wow. That's very profound. Visual Ghoul Cells tell people to like the stream. You can like the stream if you want. Adamantry, tribalism is a natural state of humans, and that is one large reason why we start pulling away from each other. I do often think about that, whether we are inherently tribal, and we like listening to thoughts that are similar to us. We like being reinforced that our view of the world is absolute. We like feeling that we are right, we are strong, and there are enemies that we are better than. And that's almost, you can't, that works on an individual level, but you cannot square that between different tribes without conflict. Really, this is more and more heading towards a world war. I didn't think that a week ago. I would say in some ways that it feels a bit more settled. Like, we understand a lot more about NATO's position. They're not rushing into anything. The boundaries have been set. You know, Ukraine and Kyiv, Ukraine and Russia are having a conventional war, and Ukraine is being supplied by the West, but the West is not providing troops. And whoever wins the war, wins the war. That's kind of NATO's position, it seems to be. And NATO hopes that Ukraine wins the war. But ultimately, if Ukraine is going to lose the war, NATO is not going to step in. The only thing, and this is something I said I think on the first or second stream, the longer this war goes on, and if it gets more brutal and devastating, the more images that come out of Ukraine to the West will make it more unpalatable for NATO to continue to stand by. Because the question will be, well, what is fighting World War III worth? What is it worth fighting World War III over? And if not this, then what needs to happen for NATO to use all that military right? Looks like there was some lights going off there. This is a camera that I think is Taiwanese news have this on the Fox News. Don't know if anyone saw that. Showing from tribalism is built by the media. Third place of talks will take place on 7th of March. Oh, thanks, Cara. Okay. JD, it feels like the calm before the storm. Yeah. Hey, Hugh Hattrick. Sorry I missed you there. Hey, Hugh. Hi, Kurt. Loving the news channel. Wasn't sure Putin invading Ukraine. Now he's got the West stuck as what we can do. I think the West has... Hugh Hattrick is a racing journalist. He's like the Jeremy Paxman of the sim racing world. So Hugh, it's pretty clear that NATO has drawn the boundaries of what's tolerable beyond Ukraine. And NATO, as I said, NATO is not going to get directly military involved, although the lines are blurred with supplying weapons and supplying, even aircraft, for example. The question is how long that will hold. And if NATO is going to tolerate this, and Russia is successful, then it will embolden Putin. And what will he do next? You can see more flashes here, by the way. What will Putin do next? Sorry, Mr. Dehi. Financial Times reported Ukraine is getting jets. I think I just read that somewhere. I can't remember where I read that. Matt's wrong. Hope this doesn't hurt my sim channel. We will see. I felt like it was important to stream on the first day, and I streamed sim racing tonight for 5 hours, and now we're covering Ukraine for I don't know how many hours it will be. So at a weekend I can do both, but. Joseph, does Ukraine have any pilot training for the... I think the idea with EU Parliament kind of agreeing to provide MiG and Sukhoi fighter jets was that the Ukrainian pilots would be trained on them. I don't know what jets the US can provide that Ukrainian pilots would be trained on. Unless there are Ukrainian expat pilots or something. GJ Petma, sometime one day 1984 seems to be in full effect, and Russia, China, India are the only ones standing up against it. It's interesting if you've read 1984 and you think that Russia is the country standing up against it. Oh, thanks, Christopher. Yeah, if you are watching and you want to understand more about sim racing, then definitely do subscribe. You will not regret it. If you're watching and you enjoy this community and covering these events, then yeah, please feel free to subscribe, but bear in mind you'll get sim racing content. That's why I keep checking in to see Kira's race every day. I'm really sorry, but I raced for 5 hours earlier on stream. Okay, I can't remember where I read that about the US jets. That would be a very provocative step. And again, talking about blurring the lines. And it is a practical question about how the Ukrainian pilots would know how to fly these jets. It's a very interesting question because I think these MiG-29s that seem to be doing most of the heavy lifting for Russia just don't seem to be establishing air superiority. So an F-16... which is by now is 3 generations old for US military. They've had the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning coming after. So it's 3 generations old, which still, I believe, dominate MiG-29s. I don't know if you have some military plane experts in the chat. Oh, it's WSJ, okay. Hugh Hattrick, I don't know whether I trust the mainstream media. The narratives are big on both sides, but I'm no fan of Putin. Yeah. Bistav says, satisfied and happy people won't start conflicts. Tribalism and nationalism is just ways to weaponize dissatisfaction. Thanks, Martin. I don't know about Typhoons, Eurofighters. There's Eurofighters on that, but you'd imagine a fully armed F-16 would, be any MiG-29 in a dogfight. But again, I'm not a fighter jet expert. I don't know if anyone knows. Don't know if anyone knows if there are any Eurofighters at F-16 on transponder. It looks like the military aircraft are really off transponder today. They can fly A-10s. If it's A-10s, that's interesting because that kind of would tie in a little bit with these convoys, right? If there's these military convoys and Russia doesn't have air superiority, and Ukraine are able to take out the anti-air on the ground, then an A-10, would be happy hunting, you'd imagine. Backburners, the gas field in Donetsk is huge. It may be that a lot of these wars are still fought over natural resources, and that feels like an old school thing to say, but you could say that a lot of wars perhaps are fought over natural resources. And that is the ultimate realization of scarcity. So, that's in comments. Yeah, so I think that was the idea with jets. Does anyone know, by the way, what happened with those jets? Because I think it was Poland, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria were meant to supply jets. And then I think it fell apart, but I'm not sure. Tracker says it's down to the pilot. Really, the new upgraded F-16 are much better than the MiGs. Thanks, Robert. Rebel, I feel the issue for Ukraine isn't just having fighter jets, it's being able to hide them. Yeah, it seems incredible that there's been a conflict, an invasion. A military superpower has decided to invade another country in the 21st century and has not established air superiority. Or a cruise missile equipped superpower has invaded another country and hasn't knocked out and destroyed all their airfields within the first day. Seems extraordinary. Thanks, John E. McCormick, for the 250 Filipino pesos. A thought, perhaps Putin's aim is the Balkans. All eyes look to the Baltics. If Putin can control the Balkans, he has access to the Black Sea. Yeah, I don't know what you mean by Balkans and talking about access to the Med. I don't know if you're including Romania in that. Even so, right, I'm not sure I can explain this point in the way that I should be able to, but if it's strategically important for Russia to have further access to the Black Sea, a warm water port, for economic growth, for economic reasons, they want to have a Black Sea port, whether that's militarily to kind of, to give them that security, or just purely for economic reasons in terms of trade or whatever. That has been massively outweighed by the sanctions, surely. So if those sanctions are not going to be lifted, then it's just one step forward, 20 back, I think. I don't know if that's just the way I look at it. Okay, to me, that Russia doesn't have air superiority basically proves Western countries are already operating in the airspace. That would be, I mean, I can't remember exactly what the premise was of that movie, Behind Enemy Lines, with Owen Wilson. But that would be a yeah, wasn't it Gary Powers was shot down? Was Gary Powers a U-2 pilot? I'm going to get the story horrifically wrong. But in the Cold War, wasn't Gary Powers a U-2 pilot, and he was shot down by a Russian missile? So a US Air Force pilot was shot down, and that was when the war almost got pretty hot. One of them, Cuban Missile Crisis, another. So you might have a kind of Gary Powers incident. I don't know how all this stuff is still in my brain. Yeah, I thought that European Parliament initiative had been pretty much shot down, if you excuse the pun. Pretty incredible that a U2 was shot down. If a missile can get up to a U2, check out GLF 6. That sounds like a I was gonna say a private jet. Afraid I can't see it. How did they manage to shoot a U2 down? I think it was a ground to air missile that could go at high altitude. To note, it seems like both sides' anti-air capabilities outweigh the likely losses to either side's air force. Can really only speculate, but overall it's odd. It does seem it's something that I like really badly got wrong. And the first day I said I don't see how Ukraine is going to repel this invasion. It looks like Russia is going to get air superiority, and then their armor columns will be able to advance under that air superiority. It seems like the Russians aren't as good as previous Western coalitions as establishing air superiority and also operating at night. I don't know about this. Well, I've never seen this camera before, by the way. We've seen this camera. I think this is a Fox News, Taiwanese news camera. I thought an SR-7, a Blackbird, was able to evade anti-air missiles. There's someone in this chat who see some more flash of light. Interesting if they can corroborate them. Someone in this chat who's called Blackbird and has an SR-71 as their profile picture. Has everyone seen, by the way, the footage today of the Stinger missile shooting down a Russian transport helicopter? Because to me it seemed unusual that the missile was fired into the advancing helicopter. It would seem more the usual thing to fire it after the helicopter so it can track the helicopter. It seems very high risk to fire it at an advancing helicopter. Obviously there was a drone up there. I've flown my drones in Lithuania a couple of times and Poland, and very similar landscape, like fields, thin strips of woods. I've flown drones up there and seen the exact landscape, and it's very surreal to see that footage. We won't show it here because I think pretty obviously the pilot and any crew will have been killed. But as extraordinary footage, really. Sonia, new stream idea: you could sim fly fighter jets. You know what? In all joking aside, I think I will probably. This has reignited kind of like an interest in geopolitics and military equipment, and I probably will get more into flight simulators and maybe stuff like that. Thanks, Kay, for $10. Thank you for hosting this conversation. Really appreciate your thoughts. It's you. This has honestly been anyone that's been in multiple streams. The mods have basically got a day off today. The conversations has been incredible and different. And if you have different thoughts, if you disagree with anything I'm saying, let me know. Say it. If you disagree with something anyone else is saying in the chat, say it. Just say it respectfully, and we can talk about it. Yeah, but when I was younger, I had a Microsoft joystick, and I had F-16 Fighting Falcon, and I had a double disc that was F-22 Raptor, and I think MiG-29. I think it was a double disc. So I had those military flight simulators where you do like dogfighting and stuff like that. The F-16 game had the most incredible, not trailer, what's it called at the beginning of the game? You know, the intro had just the most incredible intro. In fact, let me just try and find and see if I can get this that I had. I was probably like, I was very young when I had this. Because there was a company in the UK that used to package like old video games and them and like sell them for like £5. Yeah. So this is the game I had. I don't know if anyone knows when this game came out. Maybe like 95, maybe 1995, and just the concept of having a three-dimensional imagery was just like you looked at the image and you thought the game would be like that, and even though the game wasn't like that, it in your head it was. It's very weird to explain. Downhill, you mentioned a few streams and that Russia don't have air superiority. I wonder how you define the difference between air superiority and absolute air supremacy. But I'm basing that on the fact that the Ukrainians and the US, the Pentagon have said that Ukraine maintains the operability of most of its fixed-wing aircraft, aka fighter jets and bombers. And for example, today a lot of footage about Russian air jets being shot down. So air superiority goes both ways. Can the Russians operate their fighter jets and bombers without being shot down? If they can, they have air superiority. And also, can the Ukrainians? Thanks, Adam McG, for the $10. Thank you for hosting a platform of conversation, and thank you so much, everyone. By the way, don't feel like you need to donate or anything to support this channel, because I'm making sim racing content, and the sim racing videos are actually still much more popular than these live streams. I run adverts on those, but thanks so much. C17 from Poland. Let me put that in, Phil. Let me put that in. It's also is it this one? Yeah. It's also reassuring to kind of keep abreast of things, and we have this space every evening, and perhaps people feel like you don't need to check everything during the day, because in these streams every evening we'll talk about everything, and you get the views from people with different opinions. You think about stuff, and hopefully, I've always said since stream one, hopefully it's reassuring, and if it's not reassuring, and in fact it is increasing your anxiety and making you more worried and making you stressed, then please don't watch the stream. Rebel stingers are effective, but only low to medium altitude. I've heard that they can go up to thousands of feet. Obviously that helicopter was flying at hundreds of feet. Yeah, I'll show you what the game looked like. Wow, it looks a lot better than I imagined, actually. Like, that's how it looked. He did a lot of missions flying out from Cyprus and everything, and I think it simulated possible upcoming conflicts. So you'd have, because F-16 is a general purpose fighter jet, can also carry air to ground as well as air to air missiles. .8 kilometers high. Yeah, almost. Yeah, that is a lot. I won't try and do a bad conversion because I'll be way out, but that is a lot. Or it's kind of like a newscast without an absolute Burke of a host. I appreciate that. Yeah, I also Ace Combat is a very weird game because Ace Combat is a game made by Konami, I can't remember, something like that, and it's a fantasy game with fantasy stories. I think it's actually set in like another world, but a lot of the planes are like genuine Russian military planes and American military planes. So you fly these jets that are completely real in these fantasy scenarios. It's a very unusual thing. Stinger seems about 12,000 feet. That is very high up. Also shows you just how low this helicopter is operating. This Duke 43. Does anyone know what's going on with Duke 43, by the way? Does anyone really know why it's circulating? Let's search Duke 43. What is Duke 43? Unfortunately, I'm on Bing, so Bing News is going to be telling me about ITV's trigger point. Can't see. I don't know if anyone knows what Duke 43 is up to. Teddy, I'm surprised no one has mentioned that Putin's a dictator. I wonder why he's killing people. It's not nice. So why no one has mentioned that Vladimir Putin is a dictator? Are you afraid? You've mentioned it. I've mentioned it. Jada, yes, this does help. Lessons to stress and anxiety of wanting to check every hour, see what's going on when you come here and get to be with all concerned people and what to catch up. I agree. That's how I feel. William Young, Boeing has an F-22 simulator used to work with the Department of Defense. That thing is insane, and the maneuverability control is absolutely nuts. The F-22 is basically a failure, though, right? In terms of a project sense. Not that many F-22s were actually built. It was essentially replaced by the F-35. So it bridges this gap between, as a stealth fighter. Is it fair to say the F-22 was not a particularly successful project? Or was it a kind of bridge to the F-35? Says, can you start doing a daily roundup catch up about an hour? Yeah, we can do that. Maybe I should have a notepad and can just note stuff down. Helena says F-35 doesn't replace F-22 though. William, I think F-35 is considered more of the failure due to cost overruns and added capabilities. Fair enough. I think a lot more F-35 have already been produced than F-22s. Maybe there's more of a demand because of the different variants. It's not VTOL, is it? Is it STOL? Says F-22 was unsuccessful. F-18 was for Navy. Jedi Master, yes, failure can't be made into next generation roles. William, they have different roles. I've already answered that point, Teddy, I think. Sorry, mate. Daniel, I thought the failure was the F-35. Helena, F-22 is air superiority. It can move like crazy. F-35 can be used like a drone or multi-role strike fighter. Jerry says problem is chemical air exchanger in the oxygen system. You have to explain that to a layperson like me. Bistev, if I recall, they wouldn't allow F-22 to be exported. VS toll, okay. Evad, I'm guessing that's Dave. The US would not export F-22. Downhill, thanks for your reply, but how can anyone ever get air superiority with possibly producing anti-air systems in every odd bush in the country? It's a great point. It's a great point, and I've seen a lot of analysis by ex-fighter pilots saying that the layout of war has changed. You now have these very expensive assets, helicopters, fighter jets, that can be taken down by, in comparison, very cheap anti-air. And that's been the case since the Stinger missile has come out. It's not a new missile. And people are making the same point about armoured APCs and tanks. So to occupy a city, you need, general thought is you need to roll in tanks and armour. But actually, the anti-ground weaponry is so effective at such a cheaper cost. You're rolling in tanks, that cost millions, or anti-air defences that cost millions. And they can be taken out by very cheap missiles, comparatively speaking. So it's a great question. How can you establish air superiority? It's a great question. So heroic mythos, the hypocrisy of Western nations. If we really cared about civil liberties and citizens of other nations, we would have sanctioned Chinese years ago. What would you have sanctioned? Okay, over civil rights. Okay, makes sense. Nowhere, Stefan. Teddy, I've literally read out your comment. That bonus of 2 miles from NATO border, planes could engage. Do you mean as long as they're 2 miles inside the NATO border, they could engage? I don't know the specifics there. It's Martin. Cara, my grandfather test flew planes for the US Air Force from 1941 to like 50s, flying P-38s, 39s, 40s, 3s. Nice. Meaning that air superiority doesn't exist with drones that fly at sub 10 meters and any platform being detonated by a ranged missile. Rebel Line, I think as a superiority fighter, the F-22 is one for sending to theatre with a near peer. F-35 is a ground attack or multi-role. The missiles have to work for F-35 as a turn and climb and not amazing. Carmela says PC version way better than the mobile version. Don't know what that's in relation to, I'm afraid. William Young, in my opinion, drone warfare is the way to go, really. Yeah, maybe this is the thing about Russia doesn't have the best drones. Or I think it might have a drone that's in early production, not sure. It has some very basic drones, it seems. Teddy, also, I don't see any bombs or shooting in every live cam I see in Ukraine. If you want to see bombing and shooting, which is terrible, there are other streams you can go to. Techno, can we talk about how stock price of Lockheed and BAE Systems have gone up way fast due to this? It makes sense. Shai said, Thomas Jefferson eloquently said, our foreign policy is based on strict neutrality and the non-aggression principle. This means peace, freedom to trade, and honest friendships with all nations. Can't really argue with that. Well, I'm sorry, Ted. I have to... there's very few people actually hide. I'm going to have to hide you because you keep seeing want to see bloody footage. Give me your expertise. I have no expertise. Wow, I'm so behind on the comments. You should consider making montage of summaries of your streams and possibly add a small intro. Yeah, I think the streams are short enough that people do watch them, and I've seen people watch them and leave comments after going through. And as I'm asking questions in the stream, people will ask comments, answer in the comments. Even like when I say, "Oh, where are people watching from?" People answer in the comments. So hopefully they're short enough for that. I don't really. Paradoxically, I don't want these streams to be a hit. Because I don't want YouTube to reclassify my channel from sim racing, which is the main thing my channel is about, and that is a nice space for me. So I'm hoping YouTube is going to allow us to have both on the channel. Stefan, you were fighting near Poland-Ukrainian border. Why? I can't see it, I'm afraid. Maybe it's an ADB. Dwight says air superiority doesn't win wars. William, Russia is mostly just siege bombarding, less direct battles, but usually in those zones, people looking down a scope, not a cell phone. Yeah, I agree. That's the whole thing about footage is it's not a priority. Information is, part of the war. So it's about getting information and getting out there that's going to help you with that. I think we watched track this plane earlier, weren't we? Gulfstream from Norway. See where it's going. Zoom through. Welcome MBR. Hi Chris in chat. Spent a day away from the TV and with girlfriend. Much needed. Sounds fantastic. You can get way too caught up in this. William Young, either Russia has their advanced units in reserve, 2, Russia has so few of the advanced weapons and most industrially cheap junk. Yep. So imagine training of Ukraine pilots going on right now in Poland, given the talk of giving flyers to Ukraine, looking forward. This is going to be a long conflict. I think there were some statements like this is going to be a 10 or 20 year conflict. I mean, we think how long Western troops from Afghanistan, or Soviet troops from Afghanistan, or British troops from Afghanistan. Yeah. Stefan, for me as a Swede, it was a matter of course send defensive weapons to Ukraine so they can defend yourselves. What is your opinion about sending defensive weapons? If your state agrees that it does not want Russia to succeed in this invasion, then yes, it makes sense to send defensive weapons. From just a kind of a neutral perspective, I'm finding it interesting, at what point do you actually get involved in the war? Has a war been officially declared? And if at some point it is, at what point are you involved in that war by sending weapons? And weapons can include, manpads or, ground-to-ground anti-tank weaponry. It can include, in Turkey's case, drones. So does it involve some sort of cyber assistance? So to what extent are you involved in that war? Exactly on point. Keen says, talk about drones. What if NATO gives Ukraine drones, let Ukraine do the maintenance, fueling, reloading, but operates them remotely? Oh, that's really blurred. If it's a European or United States soldier, or a soldier of a European member state, or United States soldier on the button, then I'm not an expert, but I would say they are involved in that. If you're supplying it like Turkey, but maybe, I don't know with these drones, maybe what if the software is supported? What if the software is supported remotely? Then to what the lines are, whether it's you're involved in war or not, I think the lines are definitely more blurred than they were when, for example, the NATO treaty was signed. Right, chat, it's 1:03 a.m. Over 500 people watching, 1 a.m. in the UK. We are going to end the stream shortly because I promised myself, this could be an interesting flight. I promised myself that I'm going to stop streaming at 1 a.m. I've already streamed 5 hours of Gran Turismo 7 and I guess 3 hours of Ukraine with a 10-minute break in between. So that is 8 hours in front of the screen. So I'm going to turn off the screen. Josh S, where's Geo? Let's just get that up again. Do you know where it is at the moment? I can't remember. So that time of the evening. Sorry, Richie, you just joined at the end of this stream. Is that time? If you got any other streams that you recommend, put the titles in the chat. If you've got any movies or books, put them in the chat. Now, this is just something I do in my spare time, Cesar. It's obviously the weekend right now. And if you enjoyed the stream, do feel free to subscribe if you're not subscribed. If you have subscribed, I really appreciate you. If you've subscribed and you really don't like sim racing, I'm sorry about that. And again, I really appreciate that you've chosen to hit that button and add another number to that subscriber number, which maybe makes YouTube share stuff more often, even though that you might have a sim racing video in your feed. So I appreciate you for that. I can never grow the channel by myself. All of this stuff has been bought by ad revenue and donations and sponsors, says my sim rig. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. This stream here is live stream events. If you want to be in live stream events, you can be there. Interesting chat. This is Live UA Map, and this is Flight Radar 24. So we're going to go to our members page, which I don't update it every day. I update it every few days or so it might be a bit out of date. And I'm happy that nothing is really kicked off in Ukraine, it seems. That makes me happy, because I think I'm not someone who enjoys this sort of conflict. And I'm happy that I was able to stream both G7 and Ukraine today. And we'll do exactly the same thing tomorrow. So thanks so much, everyone. I'm going to end the stream, go to our members page. Well, thanks, Robert, for the Australian $20. You should start another channel so this does not affect your main hobbies. I was worried, but YouTube is a sophisticated platform. I feel like YouTube knows people that are interested in following world events and says, hey, you might want to watch this. And I feel like it knows sim racing, but we will see. Thanks, Philly, as well, for becoming a Caretaker Corporal. Hope you're hope you're enjoying the streams. I appreciate you becoming a member. But yeah, thanks so much, Robert and Philly and everyone else who's likes and enjoyed the stream. I'm going to head now to our members page. Have a very good night, or rest of the day, depending where in the world you're from. And I'll see you all next time.
You are watching Kireth Card. You are watching a Kireth Card. Is there excitement? Is there anger? Maybe curiosity? Well, just let us know your thoughts in the comments. Ask any question you might want to ask. Is there excitement? Is there anger, maybe curiosity? Well, just let us know your thoughts in the comments. Ask any questions you might want to ask. If you like what you see, then go ahead and feel free to subscribe to our channel. But if you want to see more and the blood's rushing in your veins, you can't wait till the next one, well then check the description and you'll find a link. You will find a link to Discord, a link to Discord. I know it may get difficult, things would seem dark, your mind frozen like a tree's bark, but that should stop us to thrive. Get to the top, win the gold, and the thrill won't stop, because this is Kireth Card. Kireth Card. You are watching a Kireth Card. Is there excitement? Is there anger? Maybe curiosity? Well, just let us know your thoughts in the comments. Ask any questions you might want to ask, because this is a Kireth Card. With the speed on show, now you're gonna know how to get fast like a dart, just like Kireth Card. You are watching Kireth Card. You are watching a Kireth Card. You are watching Kireth Card.